The smell of burnt coffee and desperation hung in the air like a bad hangover. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday in Dallas, the kind of morning where the humidity made your shirt stick to your back before you even got to the office. I was sitting in my usual spot at the back of the conference room, away from the polished walnut table where the company's golden boy held court. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm 49 years old. I've got the kind of face that disappears in a crowd and a job title that makes people's eyes glaze over at barbecues. Senior Engineering Compliance Manager. Sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry on a fence post. But here's the thing. I'm the reason Apex Industrial Solutions hasn't been sued into the ground by angry oil companies with deep pockets and expensive lawyers. We were in the Q3 strategic planning session. At the head of the table sat Bradley Stevens, our hotshot director of operations. Brad looked like he'd stepped out of some business magazine, 29 years old, wearing suits that probably cost more than my truck payment, and throwing around words like synergistic integration and vertical optimization like they actually meant something. He'd been with the company for 4 months. I'd been here for 15 years. "We're looking at a quantum leap in revenue," Brad announced, slapping his tablet against the whiteboard. The guy had the energy of a retriever that had found a tennis ball factory. With the rollout of our AutoFlow valve system, the Petrotech Corp partnership is going to revolutionize pipeline management. We're talking about a $180 million contract, people. This is the big leagues, and our intellectual property is locked down tight. That's when my left eye started twitching. Just a little. The kind of professional irritation that comes from watching a rookie quarterback call plays he doesn't understand. I cleared my throat. In the acoustic tomb of that boardroom, it sounded like a chainsaw starting up. "Brad," I said, keeping my voice level, "quick question about that IP lockdown." Brad stopped mid-gesture and looked at me like I was a printer that had just jammed. "Mike, we're in a flow state here. Can we table the details for later?" "It's not really a detail," I said, adjusting my reading glasses. "You've got the AutoFlow valve system listed as wholly owned proprietary technology, but Patent 7849 has a pending assignment flag in our internal audit system. The rights transfer isn't complete yet." The room went quiet. Christopher Walsh, our CEO, a guy with about as much backbone as a wet paper bag, looked up from his phone for the first time all morning. "Mike," Brad sighed, making that sound people make when they're trying real hard to be patient. "Legal cleared this months ago. Petrotech is ready to sign. Stop looking for problems where there are only solutions." "I'm not looking for problems, Brad. I'm trying to keep us from committing contract fraud." I pulled out my folder, the same beat-up manila folder I'd been carrying for 5 years. Patent 7849 is the backbone of that entire valve system. If the assignment chain isn't clean, Petrotech can freeze the contract and walk away. Brad laughed. It was the kind of bark you hear from guys who peaked in college football. He looked around the table, inviting the other VPs to join in. A few of them chuckled nervously, like dogs hoping for table scraps. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Brad said, turning his back to me. "Old school thinking, roadblock mentality. We're building rockets here, Mike. You're trying to check the tire pressure while we're launching into orbit." Heat climbed my neck. Cold, hard anger. The kind that comes from a man who knows exactly how the machine works, getting lectured by a kid who just likes pushing buttons. The meeting dragged on for another hour. I didn't say another word. I just took notes. Detailed, time-stamped notes. I wrote down every promise Brad made, every risk he waved off, every regulation he called optional guidance. At the end of the meeting, as people shuffled their papers and checked their phones, Brad clapped his hands together. "One more thing, housekeeping item." He turned his laser focus on me. There was something nasty in his eyes, like he wasn't just annoyed by my earlier interruption. He was offended that I existed. "We've been reviewing the discretionary budget for end-of-year bonuses," Brad said, loud enough for his voice to carry into the hallway. "We've decided to pivot our compensation strategy toward rewarding growth mindsets. Unfortunately, Mike, based on your performance today and the general resistance you've shown this quarter, we're canceling your annual raise. The bonus is off the table too." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was horrified. You don't publicly strip a senior employee of their bonus in front of the entire executive team. It was a power move so aggressive it bordered on psychotic. "We need team players," Brad continued, flashing that smile that never reached his dead shark eyes. "Not anchors. Maybe this will motivate you to get on board with the vision." Chris Walsh didn't say a word. He just sat there tracing circles on his notepad with his pen, over and over. Blood drained from my face. My hands went numb on the conference table. 15 years. I'd missed my daughter's graduation for this company. I'd worked through pneumonia, through my divorce, through my dad's funeral, making sure their patents were filed, their compliance was clean, their asses were covered. And this punk was taking food off my table because I dared to correct him on a filing error. I didn't yell, I didn't flip the table. That's what they expected, the old guy losing his cool. Instead, I stood up. I capped my pen with a sharp click. I gathered my notebook and my tablet. "Understood," I said. My voice was steady as a concrete foundation. Brad blinked. He looked disappointed he didn't get his emotional breakdown. "Good. Glad we're clear." "Crystal clear," I said. I walked out of that conference room, my boots clicking on the industrial carpet. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown timer. They thought they'd broken me. They thought they'd put the company dinosaur in his place. I could hear them laughing as the door closed behind me. What they didn't know, what Brad's infinite arrogance hadn't bothered to check, and what Chris was too checked out to remember, was the specific history of Patent 7849. Brad was right about one thing. It was the backbone of the $180 million deal. But he was wrong about who owned it. He thought it was company property. I knew for a fact it wasn't, because I designed it. And I knew exactly where all the bodies were buried because I was the one holding the shovel. My office was in the compliance wing, which is corporate speak for the corner near the server room where they stick people who actually work. It hummed with cooling fans and smelled like ozone from overheated electronics. I liked it there. It was far from the glass offices where people like Brad touched base and circled back. I sat down in my chair. The good one I'd bought myself because the company-issued ones were designed to slowly destroy your spine, and put my hands on my desk. My breathing was shallow, my heart hammering like a jackhammer against concrete, but my mind was cooling down, freezing over into a block of absolute clarity. I opened my desk drawer. It was organized with military precision, color-coded folders, backup drives in labeled cases, and there in the back, tucked inside a plain manila envelope marked Miscellaneous Legacy, was the file. Let me explain something about patent law. It's boring as watching grass grow in January. It's a world of semicolons that can shift millions of dollars, filing dates stamped down to the second. It's a place where close enough is legally the same as complete failure. Guys like Brad think big. They think in broad strokes. They figure the details will sort themselves out. But the universe doesn't care about your job title or your Harvard MBA. The universe cares about paperwork. I pulled up the digital record for Patent 7849 on my dual monitors. The system lagged for a second, then the file appeared. Title: Automated Pressure Release. Valve System for High-Capacity Pipeline Networks. Inventor: Michael R. Thompson. Assignment: Pending. There it was. The word that was going to cost them everything. Pending. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. It was 5 years ago. I was going through my divorce. My ex-wife had decided fidelity was more of a suggestion than a commitment. I was drowning in legal bills and living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like old carpet. I threw myself into work to keep from going crazy. The company was struggling with pressure regulation issues in their valve systems. The engineering team was stumped. The visionaries were panicked, so I did what I always do. I fixed it. I wasn't a design engineer by training, but I understood the physics. I knew the safety protocols. I designed the automated release system myself, working nights and weekends in this same chair, fueled by gas station coffee and the kind of insomnia that comes from staring at an empty apartment. I filed the provisional patent application myself, listing myself as the inventor because technically I was. Standard procedure was for legal to send me an assignment form within 120 days. I'd sign it, transferring ownership to the company in exchange for, well, usually nothing. Maybe a plaque and a $50 gift card to Applebee's. But 5 years ago, legal was in chaos. The old general counsel had been fired for embezzlement. Files were lost, emails were deleted, The assignment form for patent 7849 never came. I remembered waiting for it. I remembered checking my inbox every day for 2 weeks. And then I remembered the day I stopped checking. I figured it was their job to secure their assets. I was just the compliance guy. If they had treated me right, if they'd given me the respect, the pay, the recognition I'd earned, I would have walked into Chris's office years ago and said, "Hey, we missed a signature here." I would have fixed it because that's what I do. I fix things. But today, Brad had stood in front of the entire leadership team and stripped me of my bonus. He'd taken food off my table. He'd mocked my dedication to keeping this company out of court. I looked at the screen. The patent had been granted 3 years ago. But without that assignment form, the rights remained with the inventor. Me. I owned the valve system. I owned the technology that made the autoflow line possible. I owned the engine of Brad's rocket ship. A smile tugged at my mouth. It wasn't a nice smile. I reached for my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. First, I needed to lock the door from the outside. I opened a new email. Subject, quick IP verification check. I didn't send it to Brad. I didn't send it to Chris. I typed in the email address of Andrew Parker, the Chief Compliance Officer at Petrotech Corp. Andy and I had met at industry conferences over the years. We'd bonded over our shared hatred of buzzwords and our appreciation for well-organized filing systems. "Hey, Andy," I typed. "Just doing routine housekeeping before the big partnership signing. Can you confirm what documentation you have on file for the 7849 patent family? Our new director seems confident everything's automated these days, but you know how I am about crossing T's and dotting I's. Best, Mike." It was innocent, helpful, the kind of email a diligent compliance manager sends. But to a guy like Andy, it was a fire alarm. It was code for check your records. Something's wrong. I hit send. Then I minimized the email window, opened my compliance spreadsheet, and went back to work. I had audits to run, safety reports to file. I was going to be the perfect employee. Quiet, invisible, efficient. While I worked, I imagined that email bouncing through fiber optic cables, landing in a server in Houston. I imagined the invisible noose tightening around Brad's neck. At lunch, while everyone else headed out for overpriced salads or hit the gym to burn off their corporate stress, I stayed at my desk. I unwrapped a turkey sandwich I'd brought from home and dialed a number I hadn't used in 6 months. "Denton Patent Services, this is Jonathan." Jonathan Barnes was 68 years old, a retired patent examiner who now worked as a consultant for people who could afford his hourly rate. Or in my case, for people who'd been bringing him homemade beef jerky every Christmas for a decade. "John, it's Mike Thompson." "Mike, what's the good word? Finally ready to quit that circus and work for someone who appreciates talent?" "Not yet, John. But I've got a hypothetical for you. I love hypotheticals. Usually means someone screwed up big time. Let's say an employee creates a patentable invention during off hours using his own resources and files it under his name. Let's say the company includes that invention in a major commercial contract but never executes a formal assignment of rights. And let's say the employee's contract had a sunset clause on IP claims that expired 2 years ago due to a corporate restructuring. Silence on the line. I could hear John taking a drag from his cigarette, one of the few guys left who still smoked in his office. "You talking about the 2019 merger? When Apex dissolved the LLC and reformed as a C-Corp? That's the one." John wheezed, a sound that was half laugh, half cough. "Mike, if they didn't get that assignment signed before the entity dissolution, that IP doesn't belong to the new corporation. It belongs to the ghost of the old LLC. And since the LLC is dead, it defaults back to the creator. Watertight? Tighter than a tick on a hound dog, son. Without that signature, they're selling a truck they don't have the title for. If they try to execute a deal based on that IP, it's fraud. Federal fraud." "Just checking my math," I said. "Give 'em hell, Mike." I hung up the phone. The weapon was loaded. 10 minutes later, my desk phone rang. It was Andy from Petrotech. "Mike, got your email," he said. His voice was tight. "I'm looking at our due diligence folder right now. You're asking about patent 7849, right?" "Yeah," I said, typing away at my keyboard to sound busy and casual. "Brad mentioned the autoflow rollout is completely dependent on it. Just wanted to make sure our cross-references match your records." "Mike, I'm looking at this file right now," Andy said slowly. "I see the patent grant. I see the technical specifications. But the chain of title folder is empty." "Huh. That's weird. Maybe it got misfiled during our system migration. I'm checking the USPTO database, Andy said. His typing sounded like machine gun fire. Mike, it lists the owner as you. Michael R. Thompson, individually. I pretended to be surprised. Well, that was the original filing, but there should be an assignment document somewhere. I mean, we're about to sign a $180 million contract. Legal wouldn't miss something like that. Mike, Andy's voice dropped an octave. If there's no assignment on file, Petrotech can't touch this deal. Our risk protocols strictly forbid integrating third-party IP without full indemnification and ownership transfer. If this technology belongs to an individual employee, Jesus, does your director know? Oh, Brad's very confident about everything, I said. He told me explicitly this morning not to worry about details. Said the IP was locked down tight. He's lying or he's an idiot, Andy said flatly. He's very visionary. I have to flag this immediately, Andy said. I'm putting a hold on the payment schedule until this gets cleared up. Mike, if this isn't resolved before the board meeting, they're going to have my head for due diligence failure. You've got to do your job, Andy. Same as I do mine. I'm sending a formal request for information to your general counsel. I'm copying your CEO. Sounds like the right call. Good luck. I hung up the phone and took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. The fuse was lit. It would take a few hours for that request to work its way through our company's bureaucratic digestive system. Legal would get it, panic, and start searching. They wouldn't find anything. Then they'd call Brad. I checked the time, 1:15 p.m. I opened my email and sent a request for a personal day tomorrow. Reason? Stress management. I wouldn't be here when the bomb went off. I wanted them to sit in the crater alone. I spent the rest of the afternoon doing exactly what they paid me to do. I organized files, updated compliance logs, reviewed safety reports. I was a ghost haunting a machine I'd already sabotaged. Around 3 p.m., I saw Brad strutting past my office. He was laughing into his headset, probably talking to some recruiter about how awesome he was. He didn't even glance at me. To him, I was office furniture, a filing cabinet that occasionally made noise. He had no idea the furniture had just canceled his golden parachute. I packed my bag at 5 p.m. sharp. I took my personal notebooks, my coffee mug, my framed picture of my daughter. I left the company laptop on the desk. "Good night, Mike," Timothy Garcia, the security guard, said as I badged out. "Good night, Tim. I think it's going to be a quiet evening." "Hope so," he said. It wouldn't be. I woke up at 6 a.m. without an alarm. The Texas sun was actually breaking through the clouds for once, filtering through my apartment blinds. It was quiet. No humming fluorescent lights, no chatter about quarterly deliverables. I made real coffee, not the industrial sludge from the break room. French press, dark roast. I sat on my balcony with a cup, watching Dallas wake up below. My phone was on the kitchen counter, face down, set to do not disturb except for family, but I could feel it vibrating like an angry wasp in a jar. Buzz, 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 buzz. I took another sip of coffee and smiled. Right about now, 8:30 a.m., the morning stand-up would be starting. Brad loved stand-ups, made everyone stand in a circle and share their power goal for the day while tossing around a foam football. It was infantile and humiliating. I imagined the scene, Brad catching the ball, grinning, announcing his power goal to finalize the Petrotech signature, and then the interruption. I walked into the kitchen and flipped my phone over. The screen was a wall of red notifications. 6 missed calls from Chris Walsh, 4 missed calls from HR, 15 emails marked urgent high priority. Text from Patricia Rodriguez in accounting. "Mike, what's happening? Legal is running around like their pants are on fire." Text from Tim, the security guard. "Mr. Stevens threw his coffee mug at the wall. Just thought you should know." I opened the first email from Chris. "Urgent. IP documentation 7849. Mike, we have an inquiry from Petrotech regarding assignment of the autoflow patent. They claim documentation is incomplete. Need you to pull physical files immediately. Top priority. Sent at 8:20 a.m. Second email. Where are you? Mike, you're not at your desk. I don't care about your personal day. We have a crisis. Get in here now. Sent at 8:47 a.m. And a text from Brad. Call me. No, please. No explanation. Just a command from a man who was probably realizing his empire was built on sand. I put the phone back down. I wasn't calling. Not yet. I spent the morning working on my truck, a 2008 F-150 that I'd been rebuilding in my spare time. Changing oil, checking belts, Real work that you could see and measure. Not like the abstract nonsense they peddled in corporate conference rooms. At 11:30, a courier knocked on my door. Michael Thompson, that's me. Priority delivery from Petrotech Corp Legal. Signature required. I signed for the thick envelope. Andy wasn't just flagging the issue, he was building a wall. Inside was a notice of contractual suspension. Dear Mr. Thompson, pursuant to our due diligence review of the pending partnership between Petrotech Corp and Apex Industrial Solutions, we have identified you as the sole legal owner of Patent 7849. As we have no record of a licensing agreement between yourself and Apex Industrial, we are notifying you that all integration of AutoFlow technology has been suspended effective immediately. We are prepared to enter direct negotiations should you wish to license independently of your current employer. I laughed out loud. They'd cut Apex out entirely and were talking straight to me. Smart move. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from Chris. I decided to listen to this one. Mike. His voice was tight, high-pitched. Mike, pick up the phone. Petrotech just froze the accounts. They sent a cease and desist claiming you own the technology. What the hell is going on? Brad is saying you sabotaged the database. I need you here now. Sabotage. Of course Brad would call it that. He couldn't conceive of a world where his failure was his own fault. I replied to Petrotech first. Received. I'm open to discussions, but I need to resolve internal matters first. Please maintain the freeze until further notice. Then I texted Chris. I'm on scheduled personal day. I'll be in tomorrow at 9 a.m. If you want to discuss licensing my personal intellectual property, have a meeting room ready. And Chris, you're going to need lawyers. I hit send and went back to working on my truck. When I walked into the Apex building the next morning, the silence was thick enough to cut with a welding torch. Usually there's background noise, phones ringing, coffee brewing, people talking about the Cowboys. Today it was like walking into a morgue. Jennifer Foster at the reception desk saw me come in and immediately grabbed her phone, whispering urgent words into the receiver. I badged in and took the elevator to the executive floor. When the doors opened, I saw them. A cluster of suits huddled in the hallway, looking at tablets and having aggressive, whispered conversations. Brad was there, looking like he hadn't slept. His tie was loose, his hair messed up, dark circles under his eyes that no amount of energy drinks could fix. He was pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly at our general counsel, a nervous little man who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the carpet. It's a clerical error, Brad was saying, his voice cracking. He's a compliance manager, not an engineer. He didn't invent anything, he just filed paperwork. The paperwork says he's the inventor, the lawyer shot back. And the paperwork says we don't own it. Petrotech isn't freezing payments over a clerical error. They're freezing them because we tried to sell them stolen goods. It's not stolen, it's company property. He worked here when he made it. Did you sign the assignment form? The lawyer yelled. Did you check the files? That was his job. His job is to do what I tell him to do. I stepped out of the elevator. The sound of my boots on the marble floor cut through their argument like a chainsaw. They all turned. Brad's eyes went wide. For a second I thought he might take a swing at me. But then he saw my face. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't scowling. I was completely, utterly blank. It was the face of an auditor, the face of a tax collector, the face of the inevitable. Mike, Chris said, stepping out of his office. He looked 10 years older than he had on Tuesday. My office. Now. Morning, Chris, I said pleasantly. Coffee smells good today. This isn't a social call, Brad spat, stepping toward me. You think this is funny? You think you can hold the company hostage over some filing error? I stopped and looked at him. I didn't raise my voice. I lowered it. It's not a filing error, Brad. It's the law. You told me not to worry about details. Well, the details just foreclosed on your rocket ship. Brad's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. I walked past him into the boardroom, the same room where 2 days ago he'd stripped me of my bonus. Chris followed me in. The lawyer followed. Brad scrambled in last, looking like a cornered rat. I sat down at the head of the table. I didn't ask permission. Chris hesitated, then took the seat to my right. Brad sat across from me, vibrating with rage and panic. Petrotech has frozen the $30 million initial payment, Chris said, his voice shaking. They're threatening to pull the contract entirely. Our stock is down 8% in pre-market trading. Mike, tell us how to fix this. Fix it? I asked. I tried to fix it on Tuesday. You told me I had a bad attitude. We're past that, the lawyer interrupted. Mike, let's be reasonable. We know you filed the patent while employed here. Implied ownership statutes clearly state, don't quote statutes at me, I cut him off. I know patent law better than you do. That's why you pay me to handle compliance. The work was done after hours using my own resources. You had 120 days to execute assignment of rights. You didn't. The company dissolved and reformed. The rights didn't transfer because they weren't listed in the LLC's assets. They defaulted to the inventor. I pulled a folder from my briefcase and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a notarized affidavit from the USPTO confirming my ownership. Patent 7849 is mine, I said. And since AutoFlow can't function without it, AutoFlow is effectively mine too. This is extortion, Brad hissed. I'm not doing anything, Brad. I'm just sitting here. You're the ones who sold a product you didn't own. That's fraud. Federal fraud. You know what the penalty is for defrauding partners in deals involving public companies? Prison time. Not the nice kind with tennis courts. Brad went pale. What do you want? Chris asked. He sounded defeated. I want to negotiate, I said, but not for a raise, certainly not for a bonus. I leaned forward. I want to discuss the terms of your surrender. The room went dead silent. We can fire you, Brad blurted. Gross misconduct, insubordination. Go ahead, I said. Fire me. Then I walk out that door, call Andy at Petrotech and sell them an exclusive license directly. You'll lose the $180 million. You'll get sued by your shareholders. And you, I pointed at Brad, will be unemployable in this industry for the rest of your life. Brad slumped back in his chair. So, I said, opening my notebook, let's talk numbers. Chris was the first to speak. Okay, Mike, you've made your point. You have the leverage. We need the rights to 7849 assigned to the company to unlock the Petrotech deal. What's your price? It's not a buyout, I said calmly. We're discussing a licensing agreement. I looked at my notes. Here are the terms. First, a retroactive licensing fee for unauthorized use over the past 3 years. Based on standard industry rates for valve technology licensing, that comes to $120,000. Brad winced, but didn't explode this time. Second, a forward royalty of 1.2% on all net revenue generated by the AutoFlow line. 1.2% of net? Chris calculated quickly. That's still significant over the contract life. Then negotiate with Petrotech yourselves, I said, starting to close my notebook. Wait, Chris said quickly. What else? Third, I want a formal written apology from both of you, acknowledging that this crisis was due to executive oversight and failure to heed compliance warnings. This goes to HR and the board. I'm not signing that, Brad said, but his voice had lost its fight. Yes, you are, Chris said flatly, not even looking at Brad, because if you don't, you're fired. And Mike, what else? Finally, I said, getting to the part I'd enjoy most. I'm resigning today. The license agreement will be between the company and my new firm, Thompson Engineering Solutions. You'll be my first client. Same hourly rate as my current salary, plus the licensing fees. It took legal 3 hours to draft the contracts. When they brought back the papers, I read every single word. The most important clause was buried on page 18. Technical integrity rights, meaning they couldn't modify my valve system without my written permission. They signed everything. Chris first, then Brad, with a shaking hand. 3 weeks later, I was working from my home office when Brad sent his first email requesting permission to modify the pressure parameters. I waited 24 hours before replying, request denied. Proposed changes exceed acceptable risk thresholds per technical integrity clause. I imagined him reading it. I imagined that vein popping in his forehead. I took a sip of my expensive coffee and smiled. My new company was already getting calls from other firms who'd heard about the Apex situation. Turns out there's good money in being the guy who can bring a $180 million deal to its knees with a single email. Compliance isn't the enemy, Brad. Arrogance is. And I was the repo man who'd come to collect your rocket ship.